The night was silent except for the soft crackle of fire. Snow stretched across the land like a white blanket, cold and endless. A lone human sat by the fire, his hands wrapped around a metal cup, steam rising from the hot drink inside. The warmth touched his face, but the cold air around him still bit deep into his skin. He had traveled for days through the frozen wasteland, searching for shelter, food, and maybe answers to questions he could not ask out loud. The fire was his only friend tonight, the drink his only comfort. He stared at the flames as if they might whisper back to him, tell him he was not alone. But then, something broke the silence. Footsteps, slow and uncertain, pressing into the snow not far away. The human froze, his body tensing, his hand slipping quietly toward the knife at his side. He knew these lands were dangerous, filled with things that lived in shadows, things that hunted the weak. His eyes scanned the darkness. The fire flickered, shadows moved, and then he saw her. She stepped forward slowly, her body thin, trembling, her eyes wide with fear. An alien woman, her skin faintly glowing under the moonlight, like blue glass touched. By starlight, her hair was tangled, silver strands falling across her tired face. Her clothes were torn, her feet bare in the snow. She looked fragile, yet something in her presence made the human's heart beat faster. She stopped a few steps away, shivering violently. Her gaze fell on the fire, then on the cup in his hand, steam rising into the cold night. The human did not move. His instincts told him to be cautious. He had seen aliens before. Some were kind, others were cruel, and many carried secrets too heavy for him to understand. But this one looked desperate, almost broken. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Only a soft sound, a whisper carried away by the wind. For a long moment they just stared at each other, the fire between them. He lifted the cup slightly, tilting it toward her. A silent offer. Her eyes widened, glowing faintly with reflected light. And she stepped closer. She sat carefully near the fire, her body stiff as if afraid to be rejected. The human poured some of the hot drink into a smaller cup and held it out. Her hands shook as she took it, her skin brushing against his for a brief second. It was cold, so cold that it felt like touching ice. She lifted the drink to her lips, and when the warmth spread through her, she closed her eyes as if it was the first time she had felt alive in days. A soft sigh escaped her, a sound of relief. The human watched quietly, unsure why he felt a strange pull inside. This was just a simple act, sharing warmth with someone lost. Yet it felt like the beginning of something heavier. The woman held the cup tightly, her eyes glistening with something. Unspoken tears, gratitude, fear? He could not tell. She looked at him then, her gaze soft but piercing. She touched her chest lightly with her hand, then pointed at him. A gesture, a message he could not fully understand, but he felt it deep in his heart. She was telling him something important, something more than words could carry. The fire popped, sparks flying upward, and for a moment the night seemed less lonely. Yet the human could not shake the feeling that danger was close. If she had come here in such a state, barefoot in the snow, chased by shadows, then something or someone must be following her. His grip tightened on the knife at his side. He glanced at her again, her fragile form curled near the fire, clutching the drink as though it was life itself. She trusted him. He could see it in her trembling body, in the way she leaned closer to the flames only after he nodded. That trust weighed heavy on him. He had not asked for it, but now it was his to hold. The night dragged on and the human sat by the fire with her in silence, but silence was not empty tonight. It was full of unspoken questions, hidden fears, and something else, something new he could not name. The snowstorm whispered across the land, the fire crackled, and two strangers sat side by side, one human, one alien, and between them only a single hot drink that had changed the night. The human knew nothing about her, not even her name. Yet in his heart he felt a strange truth. This meeting was not an accident. It was the start of something he could not yet imagine. And as the flames burned brighter against the cold night, he wondered what price he would pay for this single act of kindness. The fire still burned, though weaker than before, its glow flickering in the cold air. The human added another piece of wood, sparks flying up into the night. Beside him, the ET alien woman sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the flames as if she feared they might vanish. The cup was still in her hands, nearly empty now, but she held it close as though it was her only shield against the world. He studied her in the firelight, unsure of what to make of her. Her glowing markings, faint but clear, pulsed like hidden veins of light across her arms. They shimmered whenever she breathed deeply, and he wondered if they were natural or if someone had marked her for reasons he could not guess. Her silver hair reflected the light like threads of frost, framing her tired, beautiful face. She was unlike anyone he had met before, fragile yet strange, and it unsettled him in ways he could not explain. She glanced at him, quickly, then lowered her gaze again. The way she moved was careful, hesitant, as though one wrong gesture might bring punishment. It was the behavior of someone used to danger, used to cruelty, and he felt his chest tighten at the thought of what she had endured. The human wanted to speak, to ask her name, to know why she was here. But the barrier of language stood tall. Between them, he sighed softly and looked into the fire. Then, without words, she raised her hand and touched her chest again, right where her heart was. Her fingers glowed faintly against her skin, and then she pointed at him once more. He tilted his head, confused but intrigued. Was she trying to say her name? Or was she saying she trusted him? The moment stretched between them, fragile like glass. The human slowly pressed his hand against his own chest, copying her. Then he gestured toward her, his brows raised in silent question. Her lips parted, and for the first time, a sound left her mouth. It was soft, almost like a song, a single word carried by a trembling voice. He did not understand the meaning, but he knew it was her name. She said it again, gently like an offering, and then she pointed to him, waiting. He hesitated, then spoke his own name aloud. Her lips moved as she tried to repeat it, the sound awkward but warm. Something inside him stirred when he heard his own name spoken in her voice. She smiled faintly, her first true smile, fragile but real, and the firelight made it glow like the snow itself had softened. In that moment, the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt full, alive, like something invisible had been exchanged. Not words, not promises, but understanding. The night grew colder, the wind howled through the trees, yet they stayed near the fire. The human offered her some dried food from his pack, breaking it into smaller pieces so she would not struggle. She took them with trembling fingers, bowing her head slightly each time as though it was a ritual of thanks. She ate carefully, savoring every bite as if food had been a stranger to her for too long. He felt a pang of guilt for how easily he had once taken warmth and food for granted. Her presence made every simple act feel heavier, more important. She was showing him how much a small kindness could mean when the world had taken everything else. Then, a sound broke the stillness again. Not footsteps this time, but something, distant, echoing across the frozen land, a howl, long and low, carried by the wind. The alien woman stiffened, her cup slipping slightly in her grip. Her glowing markings flared brighter for a heartbeat, then dimmed. She turned to him, her eyes wide with fear, and she shook her head rapidly as if to say, "No fire, no light." Her hands moved quickly, drawing shapes in the air, her gestures desperate, but he could not understand them all. Still, he understood enough. Something out there was searching for her. He looked at her trembling form, the way her hands pressed against the ground as if she was ready to crawl into the shadows. Whatever hunted her was real, and close. His mind raced. Should he put out the fire, hide in the darkness, or stand ready with his knife? But when he looked at her again, he felt the weight of her trust pressing into him. She was afraid, yet she had chosen to sit by his side, to share his fire, to speak her. And now she was warning him, protecting him in her own way. The silence between them had become a bridge, one built from fear, trust, and the warmth of a single drink. The human reached forward, slowly covering the fire with snow until the flames died. Darkness wrapped around them like a cloak. The only light left was the faint glow of her markings. She looked at him, her lips trembling as she whispered her strange word again. Her name, softly, like a plea. He whispered his own name back, steady, promising. The howl in the distance echoed once more, but now they were hidden, together in the shadows. He could feel the cold cutting deeper, but the bond between them burned hotter than any flame. The night stretched on, danger circling in the dark, yet neither of them moved away. They had no words, only gestures, glances, and the silent exchange of trust. And in that silence, the human realized something powerful. He was no longer alone, and neither was she. The fire was gone, buried under snow, and the night wrapped them in silence. The only light came from the faint glow of the alien woman's markings, dim but steady, painting soft lines across her arms and face. The human sat close, his knife in hand, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. The snow whispered as the wind carried it across the land, but underneath that whisper, he thought he heard something else, something heavier, a crunch, distant but deliberate, like footsteps pressing into frozen ground. The woman froze, her body stiff, her eyes darting toward the sound. Her lips parted, but no words came, only a trembling breath. She pressed her fingers to her lips, then to his, a desperate plea for silence. The human nodded, his hand tightening around the knife handle, his other arm shielding her without even thinking. It was instinct, the same instinct that had driven him to share his fire and his drink. He had not asked for this, yet here he was, protecting her. The sound grew closer, moving slowly, circling. The night pressed heavy on them as if the darkness itself carried weight. Snow shifted again, followed by a low growl that sent a chill through his spine. Not an animal, he thought. The sound was too controlled, too knowing. The alien woman's markings flared for a moment before she forced them dim again, her trembling hands clutching her own arms. She was hiding her light, he realized, afraid it would give them away. Whoever hunted her already knew she was near. The human's mind raced. If these shadows were searching for her, why had they not attacked yet? Why circle in the snow? Why wait? The thought gnawed at him. This was not a hunt, it was a game, and they were being toyed with. The woman leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against his, her silent trust pressing into him again. Her fear was raw, but so was her belief that he would stand between her and the danger outside, and that belief bound him tighter than chains. A sudden sound split the silence, sharp and near, the crunch of snow just beyond the tree line, followed by a whisper. Alien words carried on the wind. The woman flinched, burying her face against his shoulder. The human's eyes narrowed, his heart pounding. So it wasn't just beasts in the night, it was people, or something worse, hunters, speaking a tongue he did not know, but one she clearly understood. Her body shook as she clung to him, her breath shallow. He felt her whisper against his ear, a single trembling word in her own language, though he could not understand it. The desperation in her voice told him enough. She was begging him not to let them take her. The sound of her fear struck deeper than the cold ever could, and in that instant, he made his choice. He would not hand her over, not to shadows, not to hunters, not to anyone. He shifted quietly, scanning the ground for cover. Snow lay thick around them, broken only by the bare bones of frozen trees. If they moved now, they could reach the rocks at the ridge, a place where the firelight had once bounced earlier. But if they stayed, the hunters would find them. He leaned close, pointing toward the rocks, his hand brushing against her arm to guide her eyes. She looked, then shook her head, tears brimming in her glowing eyes. She was too weak, too cold. She could not run. The human clenched his jaw, his mind torn between choices. Then he placed his free hand over hers, steady and firm, a silent vow that she was not alone. The growl came again, closer this time, joined by another, multiple hunters, moving together, spreading out. The woman pressed against him, her body trembling, her markings betraying her with flickers of light she could not control. He wrapped his cloak tighter around her, hiding her glow. Every second stretched into eternity. Every sound in the snow sharpened into a threat. And then, from the dark, two glowing eyes appeared, low and sharp, watching, waiting. The human's grip on his knife tightened. The moment had come, but the creature, or man, or whatever it was, did not strike. It lingered in the shadows, growling softly as though testing him. The alien woman whimpered, burying her face deeper into his chest. He held her close, his own heart racing. His breath controlled, he knew they would not stop, not until they had her. The night had become a cage and the snow their prison. Still something burned in him. He had been alone for too long, living only for himself, surviving for nothing. But now, with her clinging to him, trusting him even in her fear, he found a reason stronger than survival. He whispered her name, the one she had given him, and she looked up, her eyes wide, shimmering in the faint light. Then he whispered his own, steady and calm, reminding her of the bond they had begun. Her trembling slowed, her fear easing just enough for her to nod. Together, they turned their gaze back to the shadows in the snow. The danger had not yet struck, but the war had already begun. And in the silence between their breaths, the human knew this was only the beginning of something far greater than fear. The night finally gave way to a pale morning. The snow that had fallen in silence now glistened under the weak sunlight. Frost clung to every branch and stone, turning the world into a frozen painting. The human rose slowly, his body stiff from sitting awake all night, knife still in hand. Beside him, the alien woman stirred, her silver hair tangled, her fragile frame wrapped tightly in his cloak. She had fallen asleep, leaning against him, trembling less as the hours passed. Her soft breaths rose and fell, the faint glow of her markings dim but steady, like embers refusing to die. He studied her for a moment, an odd warmth stirring inside him. She was a stranger, yet she had placed her life in his hands without a word, and he had protected her without question. That bond, silent yet heavy, weighed more than any spoken promise could. When her eyes opened slowly, she blinked at the light, confusion and fear flashing across her face before she remembered where she was. Then her gaze softened as it landed on him. For a heartbeat, it felt like trust itself had a shape, and it lived in her eyes. The human handed her a piece of dried bread from his pack. She accepted it with both hands, bowing her head in quiet thanks. The way she ate was careful, almost ritualistic, as though every bite mattered. When she finished, she looked at him again, her lips parting as though she wanted to speak. Only a soft hum came out, a sound like a song carried on the wind. Then she placed her hand on her chest and repeated her name. He nodded, repeating it after her, his voice steady, her face lit up with a fragile smile. And then she pointed at him, waiting. He spoke his own name again, slower this time. She tried to mimic it, her voice uncertain but growing clearer. Hearing her speak his name stirred something deep inside him. It was as if the bond between them had grown roots, invisible, yet strong. They sat together, and she began to use her hands to form shapes in the air. At first he did not understand, but slowly he realized she was trying to tell him her story. Her gestures painted images of fear, of running, of chains and shadows. She clutched her wrists, as though bound, her expression twisting in remembered pain. Then she pointed at the woods, her eyes darkening. Hunters, he thought. Whoever they were, they had marked her, chased her, and broken her. His jaw tightened as he watched her. Without words, she was telling him of the world she had escaped, and without words, he understood. When she lowered her hands, trembling, he did something unexpected. He reached out and placed his hand gently over hers, steadying her. Her eyes widened in surprise, but she did not pull away. Instead, her glow flared softly where their skin touched, like her body itself responded to his presence. The warmth spread between them, not from the fire but from something unspoken. She touched his chest lightly, right over his heart. Her fingers lingered there as if she could feel its beat. The human swallowed hard, his own breath caught in his chest. It was not language, not words, but it was more powerful than either. For a moment the frozen wasteland around them disappeared. There was only the sound of their breaths, the pulse of his heart, and the faint glow of her markings. The bond between them grew in silence, fragile, yet undeniable. She trusted him, and he, though he could not explain why, trusted her. He had met traitors, soldiers, wanderers, even aliens before, but none had looked at him this way, as though his existence mattered. It was a feeling he had not known he needed until now. The moment broke when a gust of wind cut through the clearing. The cold reminded them both of the danger still lurking nearby. The woman drew back, her expression shifting to worry. She gestured toward the horizon, then pressed her hands together as though begging. He understood. She wanted to keep moving, to stay hidden. The hunters were still out there, searching. The human nodded, helping her to her feet. She wavered, her body weak. But when he placed her arm over his shoulder, she leaned into him without hesitation. Together they began to walk through the snow, leaving the ashes of the campfire behind. Every step was slow, her weight heavy against him, but he did not complain. The bond between them made the burden lighter. She trusted him to carry her forward, and he accepted that trust fully. When they reached a small ridge, they stopped to rest. The human scanned the horizon, his eyes sharp. Shadows lingered at the edge of the forest far behind them. Moving, circling, the hunters had not given up. The alien woman noticed too, her hands clutching his arm tightly. Her markings glowed brighter for a second, betraying her fear. He covered her arm with his hand, whispering his name to calm her. She whispered, his name back, soft and trembling, but with hope. And in that moment, despite the danger, they both felt stronger. The snow was deep, the cold unyielding, and the hunters closer than ever. But something greater than fear kept them moving. A bond born of silence, forged by fire, and strengthened by trust. Neither of them had asked for it, yet it had become the only thing keeping them alive. And as they walked into the endless white, their breaths mixing in the cold air, they both knew this bond would not break. Not now, not ever. Turkey. Ridge gave them some shelter from the biting wind. The human guided the alien woman to sit against the rocks, her body weak, her breaths short. He brushed snow aside to make the ground less harsh, then knelt beside her. Her markings glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat under her skin. They seemed brighter whenever she looked at him, as though her very being responded to his presence. She held his cloak tight around her shoulders, her silver hair falling across her face. The human pulled out the last bit of dried food and handed it to her. Her hands shook as she accepted it, but she broke the piece in half, offering some back. To him, he stared at her for a moment, surprised, then took it. A silent exchange again. No words, no promises, but meaning carried through the simplest of acts. As she ate slowly, her eyes never left his face. There was something in her gaze, something heavy, something more than gratitude. When she finished, she reached into the folds of her torn clothing, her hands trembling. From within she pulled, a small object glowing faintly with an inner light, a crystal smooth and clear with a warmth that seemed to pulse like living fire. She held it out to him with both hands, her eyes shining, her lips moving as if speaking words she could not share. The human hesitated, his brows furrowed. Was it a gift or a plea? He stared at the crystal, then back at her. Her body shook as she pushed it closer, her eyes pleading for him to take it. When he reached out slowly, his fingers brushed hers and a sudden warmth surged through him. It was not just heat. It was something deeper, something that touched his chest, his heart, his very breath. For a moment he felt her presence inside him, not in words but in emotions, loneliness, fear, hope, and something softer. She was offering more than a token. She was offering a bond. The human's hand trembled as he held the crystal. It pulsed gently in his palm, glowing brighter when her fingers lingered on his. Her lips formed his name again, shaky but clear. Then she placed her hand against her chest and pressed the other against his, her eyes wet with tears. The meaning was undeniable. She was offering him a place in her life, offering herself not as a burden, not as a stranger, but as family. Something deeper than survival tied them now. It was not only trust, it was belonging. His throat tightened, words failing him. He had never been given anything that felt this important. A simple man with no home, no family, no one to remember him. And yet here she was, an alien in the frozen wasteland, offering him more than he thought possible. He swallowed hard, his chest heavy with something he could not name. Her tears slid down her cheeks as she held his gaze, waiting. The hunter's shadows loomed in the distance. Danger circled them still. But in this moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the choice he now faced. He could turn away, leave her gift untouched, stay alone, safe, unchanged. Or he could accept it, knowing his life would never belong only to himself again. The human closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and pressed the crystal tightly to his chest. Her breath caught, her markings flaring brighter. A soft sound left her lips, a sound that was not fear, not pain, but relief, almost joy. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. The warmth of her glow surrounded him, and for the first time in years he did not feel alone. The bond was silent but powerful. It was a promise carried not by words but by action, by choice. He had chosen her, and she had chosen him. The snow around them seemed less cold, the danger less crushing. Even the wind sounded softer, as if the world itself acknowledged the moment. But the silence did not last. From beyond the ridge came the sound of movement, heavier now, closer. The hunters were near, their growls echoing. Against the frozen stones, the alien woman's glow flickered, fear returning. She clutched his arm tightly, shaking her head, her eyes wide. The human rose slowly, gripping his knife in one hand and holding the crystal close in the other. He looked down at her, his voice steady as he whispered his name. Again, promising. She repeated it softly, as though his name was now her shield. The shadows stretched long against the snow, and the sound of pursuit grew louder, but the human no longer felt like a man alone in the wasteland. The bond had changed him, given him a reason, given him someone worth protecting. Whatever the hunters wanted, they would not take her, not while he still drew breath. She had offered him more than he expected, and he had accepted it. Now, together, they would face whatever came. The wind howled across the ridge, carrying with it the sound of heavy steps. The human's grip tightened on his knife, his other hand clutching the glowing crystal the alien woman had given him. She pressed close against the rocks, her markings faint but flickering nervously. Her wide eyes stared into the snow-laden trees below, where dark shapes moved slowly but deliberately. The hunters had found them. At first it was only shadows, tall figures shifting among the trees. But soon their voices carried on the cold air, harsh and sharp, a language the human could not understand. The woman flinched with every sound, pressing her hands over her ears as if their words were knives. Cutting into her, she whispered his name, broken and trembling, pleading with him not to give her up. The human's heart pounded, his breath clouding the air in front of him. Every instinct told him to run, to hide, but something stronger anchored him here. The bond between them, the crystal's warmth, the trust in her eyes, it gave him a reason to stand his ground. The first hunter emerged from the tree line. He was tall, armored in black plates that glistened with frost, his face hidden behind a mask that glowed faintly with red lines. In one hand he carried a long weapon, part blade, part staff, sharp enough to cut the frozen air. Behind him, two more followed, their footsteps slow, confident, as if they already knew their prey could not escape. The woman whimpered, her hands gripping the human's arm tightly, her nails digging into his sleeve. Her glow betrayed her fear, pulsing in time with her rapid heartbeat. The hunters' masks turned toward her, and a growl of satisfaction rolled. Through the cold air, The lead hunter raised his weapon and shouted something guttural. Though the human did not understand, the meaning was clear. Surrender her. The woman shook her head wildly, tears spilling down her cheeks. She pressed her forehead against the human's chest, clutching at his cloak. Her body trembled like a leaf in the storm. The human lowered his knife, not to surrender, but to place his hand gently on her back. He leaned close, whispering his name into her ear, steady and calm. Then he whispered hers, a promise carried in 2 simple words. Her sobs slowed, her grip steadied, and she nodded against him. He would not abandon her. The hunters grew impatient, their voices rising like thunder through the snow. One of them pointed toward the ridge, barking orders. They began to climb, their heavy boots crunching into the frozen ground, weapons ready. The human pushed the woman behind him, standing tall, despite the fear pressing against his chest. He had no armor, no advanced weapon, only his knife and his will. But he would fight, because turning her over was no longer an option. Not after what she had given him, not after the bond they had shared in silence. The first hunter reached the top of the ridge, his blade gleaming. He swung it downward, a strike meant to end the fight quickly. The human raised his knife, deflecting the blow with a desperate strength. The clash rang through the cold metal, sparking against metal. His arms shook under the force, but he did not falter. The woman gasped, her markings flaring bright, her voice breaking into a cry that echoed through the snow. It was not a word. He knew, but it carried power. The hunters paused, startled, their eyes turning toward her. For a moment, the human felt the crystal in his hand pulse stronger, warmer, as if her cry had awakened something within it. He slashed forward, forcing the lid hunter back. Another lunged at him, but he ducked low, shoving his shoulder into the enemy's chest, sending him staggering into the snow. The third hunter circled, weapon raised, growling in their alien tongue. The human's breath burned in his lungs, his muscles screamed, but he did not stop. Every strike, every move was fueled by more than survival. It was fueled by the woman's trust, by the warmth of her crystal, by the unspoken bond that had already changed his life. She clutched the rock, her glowing hands trembling as though she wanted to help but did not know how. Her eyes never left him, and with every strike he fought, her light grew brighter. It was as if her faith in him made him stronger, steadier. The hunters roared, frustrated that a lone human resisted their strength, but he did not waver. When one of them lunged, too close, he drove his knife deep into the gap between the armored plates. The hunter howled, collapsing into the snow. The others hesitated, their confidence cracking. The woman cried out again, her voice carrying across the frozen land. The crystal in his hand blazed, its glow reflecting in his eyes. The hunters stepped back uneasy. They had come to claim her, but now they faced something unexpected. Not just a human with a knife, but a bond, a fire they could not see, yet could feel pressing against them. The human stood over the fallen hunter, blood steaming in the snow. He raised the crystal high, its glow cutting through the storm. The surviving hunters growled, but they did not strike. Instead, they retreated a few steps, their masks turning toward one another, their voices low and uncertain. They had expected an easy capture, not resistance born of something stronger than fear. The alien woman ran to the human side, her hands gripping his arm, her eyes wet with relief. Her glow spilled over both of them, wrapping them in a faint light. She whispered his name over and over, her voice breaking but full of hope. He held her close, his breath heavy, his body aching, but his will unbroken. The hunters were still out there, still dangerous, but they had learned something tonight. She was not alone anymore, and neither was he. The snowstorm had calmed, leaving the land quiet again. Only the crunch of retreating footsteps echoed in the distance as the hunters vanished back into the frozen forest. The human stood still, his chest rising and falling with every heavy breath, the knife trembling in his hand, the crystal glowing faintly in the other. His body ached, cuts burned across his arms, but he was still standing. Beside him, the alien woman clung tightly to his arm, her silver hair tangled, her glowing markings brighter than ever, as if his courage had awakened something inside her. For the first time since he met her, she was not only trembling with fear, her eyes wide and wet with tears, carried something different now. It was gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something warmer. She whispered his name softly, almost like a song, repeating it as though saying it kept her alive. He turned to look at her, his tired face softening. He touched her hand, steadying her, and together they sat against the ridge. The cold pressed hard, but the warmth between them was stronger. She took the crystal gently from his hand and held it between both of hers. Her markings glowed brighter, flowing across her skin like rivers of light. She lifted the crystal to her chest, then placed it against his, right over his heart. The warmth spread through him again, stronger this time. It was not just heat, it was connection. He felt her memories brush against his mind, faint but real. He saw flashes of chains, dark halls, the pain of being hunted, the despair of being alone. And then he felt her hope, fragile but bright. Hope she had found in him. The human's throat tightened as he realized the truth. She had given him this crystal not only as a gift, but as a bond in her world. This was a vow, something sacred. She had chosen him not by accident, but by trust. And in that frozen wasteland, where he had once been only a lonely traveler, he now carried something greater than himself, family, belonging, and a promise to protect. The woman leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently against his. Her breath trembled against his skin, her tears warm even in the freezing air. No words were spoken, but none were needed. He understood what she offered him, and she understood what he had already given her. More than safety, more than kindness. He had given her a place to stand without fear, and in return, she gave him more than gratitude. She gave him a future. The sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the snow. For the first time in days, the human felt warmth on his face that did not come from fire. The woman reached for his cloak, pulling it tighter around them both, sharing the small shelter it offered. Her markings pulsed slowly, no longer frantic, but calm, steady, like a heartbeat matching his. They sat together in silence. The world, still dangerous, the hunters still out there, but their bond unshaken. In fact, it had only grown stronger. The human looked at her and smiled faintly, the first real smile he had worn in years. He whispered her name again, softly with care. Her eyes brightened, and she whispered his in return, her voice sure this time, no longer trembling. Their names echoed between them, carried by the cold wind like a vow sealed in the air. When he finally rose to his feet, she did not let go of him. Her hand slipped into his, small and delicate, yet filled with strength. He tightened his grip, and together they walked away from the ridge, leaving behind the blood, the broken fight, and the silence of the night. The road ahead was uncertain, the snow deep, the hunters relentless. But none of it mattered now. They were no longer strangers, no longer alone. Every step forward was a step they took together. Every breath was shared, every glance a promise. The human, who had once thought he had nothing, now carried everything he needed. Not weapons, not riches, but a bond formed over a single hot drink, a bond that gave him more than he ever expected. As the snow crunched under their feet, the alien woman leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Her markings glowed softly, like stars guiding them through the frozen land. And for the first time in years, the human felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope.